ในช่วงนี้นะคะจะเป็นการมองมุมมองของทางฝั่งอุตสาหกรรมการท่องเที่ยวไทยเนี่ยผ่านมุมมองของชาวต่างชาติกันบ้างโดยที่เราได้รับเกียรตินะคะจากคุณอเล็กซ์เคอร์ค่ะเป็นดีเรคเตอร์อยู่ที่ NPO Chiiori Trust นะคะจะให้เกียรติมาเล่าให้เราฟังในหัวข้อ Another Thailand Unlocking Creative Cities and Communities Potential from a Japanese Perspective ค่ะ Ladies and gentlemen, a big round of applause to welcome Mr. Alex Kerr, Director of NPO Chiiori Trust on the stage, please.
Thank you very much. We have to go back a bit here. Yes, I've come to talk today about small tourism, and especially in the villages, because one of the things when people talk about tourism is about promoting tourism, getting lots of people to come. But the thing is, they've already come. And as Kyoto knows, look at this at the Gold Pavilion, and Thailand is swamped with tourists, whether it's Bangkok, whether it's Chiang Mai, they're already here. But the problem is that they're very limited about where they're going. And in Japan, we call it the golden route. So everybody goes to Tokyo, and they go to Osaka, and they go to Kyoto, and they have a great time, and the rest of the country is, large parts of it, really unvisited. And certainly the countryside. People do not go into the small villages. And a little bit of the same thing happens here. So everybody comes to Bangkok, and they go to Phuket, and they go to Chiang Mai, but are they going to go somewhere in Isan? Or are they going to go somewhere in Phayao or Nan? Probably not. And so the question is, how can you bring people out of these crowded sort of golden route channels and bring them into the villages? And that is the challenge that I really am going to be talking about today. So we're getting away from the numbers, and we're going to talk about how we can help small places that are not on the big golden route. And one of the issues that we have to think about is basically the fact that the rural population is declining. And you can see from this chart that Thailand, the number of people living in villages is down 10 million in the last 20 years. Japan is down 17 million, and the villages are actually in very serious decline. So when you go into the countryside of Japan, you're looking at decay. The people are aging, the population has dropped, the shops are empty, the houses are falling down. It's really quite a serious issue. So how can you get people to come to these villages, and how can you have a sustainable tourism? One way is old houses, and this is something I really want to talk about today. Japan is rich in beautiful old wooden houses, and actually so is Thailand. My Thai friends say, oh, if you go to the villages, most of the houses are gone, or they've been modernized. We don't really have these things, but you do. They are there, but they haven't been used. This town of Miyama, which is just outside of Kyoto, really made its old houses the theme. And it's been very successful. Young people have moved in, young artists move in, they have guest houses, coffee houses, all of that has happened. So I'm talking about three things today, houses and art and food, but we're going to start with houses. And what you're looking at here is a very special part of Japan called Iya. And there it is, and you can see that it's on the island of Shikoku, very far from everything. Kyoto and Osaka are across the inland sea. It's deep, deep in the mountains, very steep mountains. They used to call it Japan's Grand Canyon. You can see what it's like, and it's very difficult to get in there. Once you get in, you can't just come right out. It's quite remote, and you can see what the roads are like. Well, I fell in love with this very romantic valley many, many years ago, because I've lived in Japan most of my life, and back when I was in college, then that's 50 years ago, I started visiting Iya, and eventually found an abandoned house. This house, which was, at that point, had been empty for 17 years, the roof was leaking, it was a ruin, but we slowly fixed it up. We're very handmade. My friends would come. We would slowly work on it. And I gave it a name, Chiiori. That means House of the Flute. And that house is still there. And it's really the base of my operations in Japan. And the thing about Chiiori is that it's 300 years old. And over 300 years in these houses, they had a fire in the middle of the floor. They call it a irori. That's what that hearth is called. And the fire burning over 300 years just turned everything black. Here you can see what it's like. So there was always a fire, day or night, summer or winter, hot or cold. They kept that fire going. And the thing is, Chiiori became famous. Thousands of people came. And they came and they enjoyed it and they thought it was beautiful. But there were some backpackers who would stay, but your standard foreign traveler or your city person from Tokyo, they thought it was lovely, but they couldn't wait to get out of there and go back to their comfortable hotel. Chiiori needed to be restored. And this is where I want to talk about the key thing about restoring these old houses. It's not just about making it into a nice, lovely homestay in the village, because actually foreign travelers and now modern Japanese travelers they're all at a certain kind of basic lifestyle, and I think this is true of Thailand as well. They don't want to be bitten by bugs, and they don't want to have a horrible, ugly toilet, and they don't want to be hot or cold or dirty or dark. They fear these houses. If you tell them, I'm going to take you to a beautiful homestay in the countryside, they'll go, oh, really? Do I have to? So what we've done is value the house, treat the house beautifully, but bring it into the modern age, put in these comforts. And so in Chiiori, we completely restored it. Here the floors have been lifted out. Whoops. Right, going back here. We redid the roof, and we went from that to that. And the key thing is, we put in things like beautiful baths. It's not about being very high, so this is not like an expensive, high-quality hotel or a high-end spa. This is at a price point which is very reasonable for your normal foreign traveler or Japanese coming from Tokyo or Osaka. And here's the house as it now looks. And as you can see, very little has changed. If you look at it, this is pretty much what it looked like for 300 years, but under the floors is gas piping, water piping, electrical systems. We put the baths, the toilets, the heating, all of these things that make it comfortable so that people can relax and enjoy it. That's what it now looks like outside. So I went on to do houses all over Japan, but in Iya, we focused on one hamlet, which is not too far from me, called Ochiai, where we did, with the government help, we did 8 houses up there. This is the first one. And you look at this and you go, well, it's just hopeless. But once again, we restored it to its original. This is 150 years old, fixed it up. But here you can see we're putting in underfloor heating, because it's quite cold up there in the winter. We're putting in insulation. We're putting modern technology into this old house. And when it's done, it looks exactly the way those houses always looked, but now it's really comfortable. And things like, for example, the glass doors, those are double paned, which is great insulation. It means it can be snowing outside and you're comfortable inside. Another thing is that this looks beautiful, but people don't sit on the floor anymore in Japan. And the foreigners, certainly, they need a table and chair. So there's a nice kitchen. You can sit at the table and chair and read your newspaper, look at your iPhone. So what happened is, once our foreign travelers and Japanese travelers realized they could go to this very remote place, Iya, and be comfortable. They don't have to fear the house. They can be at ease. It's been extremely popular, and this has been quite a success, and now we're being copied all around Japan by other groups. And we went on and did about 50 of these houses around Japan. So this house went from that to that. One of the other houses that we did up there, this is our most popular one because it has just this stunning view. And inside, you have this really nice kind of dining area where you look out over the view. And we do modern interventions. So I'm not in the business of historical preservation. So it's not like this is how the house was in Edo period. That's not what we do. We're modernizing it. And so, for example, by the way, Thais look at this and having traveled to Thailand, they all think that Japanese toilets were always like this. The toilets and baths in the villages were horrible. No water, a hole in the floor, dirty, dark, awful. That's actually what most of the old houses are in reality. If you're in the cities, this is what you see, but not in the countryside. But this is what we put into our houses. And we would do something like this. And the key thing here is, you know, that Chiiori, the floor hearth where the fire came up, that's exactly where it originally was. We didn't move it, we didn't touch it. But we've put a sofa around it and lowered the floor. So it's a completely modern room, a very comfortable room, but it tells you, this was a Chiiori room. It's telling you about the history of the house. So the key thing is, modernizing is good, but you don't want to kill the old feeling of the house. You want to bring out what it originally was in a modern way. We've done other houses in different parts of Japan. We did a project in Chino, which is in the Nagano area, which is, they call the Japan Alps, very high mountains up there. And in that house, we took the living room and we did a sunken living room here with a wood-burning stove in the corner and made that into a very comfortable house. Here you can see it from outside. So this is the kind of thing that you can do with the old houses. And one of the reasons why this is important is that government, the Ratchagan and governments and people in the tourist industry, they love numbers. We got 100,000 people to come, we got 1 million people to come, isn't that wonderful? Well, maybe not. And the problem with big bus tourism is, for example, this town gets, I think, 1.4 million people every year. But they did a study and they found that average person stays for 40 minutes. And they use the toilet and they take their Instagram and they leave. And so it looks great on paper, but it's not really benefiting the village, and it's actually hurts the village because you have thousands of people every day pouring through those streets, so the villagers can't live properly in their village anymore. Whereas in Iya, it's a much smaller operation. We have only 9 houses. We get 3,000 people a year who stay in those houses, but they spend the night. They eat the local food. They get to know the villagers. They might do some mix of food making, like making soba noodles or something like that. They do experiences. And here's the difference. So this village looks like this. Well, you know, those people are spending no money, and the people who used to live in that village can hardly live there anymore. This is Iya, where we're getting, if you average it over a year, it's only 8 or 10 people a day. But, and this is the key thing, the amount of money that they spend, because they spend the night and they eat the food and they use the local taxi service and everything else, is 30 times what goes into the big bus village. So our 3,000 people is equal to 90,000 that come on the big buses. So the big numbers are not what you want to look at. So my next subject is about art. And especially, there are different ways to do it. And one of them, of course, is museums. And here again, when people think about museums, they usually think about big cities, right? Big museums in big cities. But Japan, and this is, I think, very unusual in the world today, has put a lot of effort into these really interesting museums in very distant, remote places, in the middle of the mountains, in the middle of the inland sea, places that are not easy to get to, and that's what's key. Because then you're drawing them away from the crowded tourist track. You're bringing them in to the villages where they're needed. And one example of this is a tiny village way up in northern Japan called Tashiro. There it is, far north. Also declining like all these other villages. But it turns out that the founder, there's a weird form of modern Japanese dance called Buto. Some of you may know about it. That's Tashiro. And the founder, that's what he looked like. And Buto is, just this completely bizarre thing. This is Buto. Hugely popular. People all over the world do this. This has had a gigantic impact on the world. So they took one of the old houses and they put a Buto museum. And what's happened is people who do contemporary dance and people who do Buto, and there are a lot of them in Thailand, they will come to Tashiro because they really care about this and they want to see it. And so around that place, you get guest houses such as this. So now there's a sustainable tourist sort of infrastructure and a new business, which is people who come to see that little museum of Buto, and then they stay in these houses. Another, probably the most successful and famous museum complex of this type is in Naoshima, and many of you may know about it, maybe you've even visited. And it's in the middle of the inland sea, and there it is. So there's Osaka, there's Hiroshima, and it's on a little island in the middle of the inland sea, and they took this island and they covered it with museums. There are a whole complex of museums scattered around. And you can see what it's like. It just floats there in the middle of the water, of the ocean. But they've built, for example, these stunning museums like this one, Teshima Museum. And enormous numbers of people come from all over the world to see this extremely well done complex of museums. It's very modern, minimalist, cutting edge world and Japanese art. For example, these are the steps of a shrine on Naoshima, but they're done in glass. They took the old town, the old fishing village, and it's still there. And of course, we took the old houses and made them into places for people to stay. Naoshima, they took the old houses and they did art installations. So this looks very old and traditional, but when you go inside one of them, you see an installation like this, where they filled the living room with water and have these blinking lights. And so people take tours of the village to see the arts installations, and then they stay there and they eat there, and it's rather like Iya. The great thing about it is you can't just come and go. You can't just come on a big bus and leave. You've got to spend the night. And so it's more of a long stay tourism. Another way to handle it is with festivals. And Naoshima really is at the center of one of these big festivals where it spread. First it started in Naoshima, then they did other islands, and it spread to more. And now there might be about 15 islands or so where people go for these really interesting arts installations. There's a triennale that they do once every 3 years. And the key thing here again is make people travel to get there. Don't make it easy. It's not about convenience. It's not about putting it in an easy place to go. Put it in a hard place to go. And that's interesting for the travelers. So for example, here's a number of the islands where they're now doing it, all through the inland sea. Not only the islands, but some of the seaports where the boats come and go from. They'll take, for example, on this island, there was an old factory, empty, abandoned, dead factory, and they put this amazing art installation when you walk into the factory. It's really fascinating. Or they'll, for example, the train station in the little port, in order to get here, you come to Uno and you have to take a ferry. You take the train and you get the ferry. And so this was done just specially. This is temporary. It's just for that one triennale. And it's kind of cool. And they get often young people to do it. Or something like this, which is right by the ferry station, made of things like used tires, but it's fun. So these kind of amusing and fun festivals that draw millions of people. Another one, which is in the mountains, is called the Echigo Tsumari, and that's also a triennale, once every 3 years, way up here, also quite remote. And here you can see, you need to kind of drive around, and here and there in the rice paddies or somewhere, you'll see some cool thing. And somebody has recently written an article in Japan Times, and they call it sweaty and inconvenient art, which I think is a wonderful phrase because it means you've really got to kind of travel there and sweat, and then you'll find something great. They took a house like this and they got volunteers who worked for something like 3 years, college students, cutting little bits into the wood of the house. So it's just sort of fascinating. Or this tunnel, an unused tunnel, and they filled it with water and they created this installation. Another way to go is youth communities. And here, though, you really need government support. And it's something that I don't know. It might be happening in Thailand, I don't know. But certain towns have really pulled to get young people to move in. THACCA, which is in the middle of Kyushu Island, has, for example, the local town supports a foreign artist to come and stay. They'll also support local artists who are doing all kinds of different things, creative art or crafts, bamboo, woodwork, and they sponsor events. So there will be a THACCA art culture event where all the young people who have moved in will open up their studios and people walk around, and again, they make it into fun, and it's succeeded. They've got about 600 young people have moved in and are living there. And it's all very low scale, small scale. By the way, in this case, we restore the old houses as kind of like almost a hotel business. Naoshima restores the old houses with art. Here, they just give the old, or for almost no rent, just let the young artists live there. So they become art studios. In my town, I live just outside of Kyoto. You can see where it is. Here's Kyoto, Osaka. We're just outside of town. And what they've done there is the local town, Kameoka, restored one old house as a kind of gathering place, a cafe where the young people can go. And they also put one of these meeting places and a workstation right in the town office. So if you're a young person and you've moved to Kameoka, you can just sit down here, use the Wi-Fi, you have a place to work. They make it easy. They do PR. They do PR on TV, magazines, all kinds of ways. So they're actively pushing to get the young people to move in. You don't just sit there and wait. And it's something that private people like us cannot do so easily. So you're going to have a local government leader who really wants it and pushes it, and then it will happen. And finally, food. And of course, food is Thailand's great strong point. And there are many, many interesting experiments going on in Thailand. But I wanted to say a few things. One of the things that we don't yet have so much in Thailand, and until recently did not have in Japan, which is world quality, sort of Michelin star type top restaurants in the countryside. There are many, many in Tokyo and in Osaka and in Bangkok. But if you went somewhere far away in Isan, are you going to find that? Probably not, although maybe it's starting now. And in Japan, though, it has started. So I wanted to introduce one of them in also a very remote place called Chizu, which is way up in the sort of in the middle of nowhere, really. It's not by the water, it's not by anything. But this small restaurant called Mitakien, and it looks very primitive. It looks very simple. Moss-covered, grass-covered, inside an old house. But what they're serving is Michelin level, and people know it. And so people now come, they'll drive 3 hours from Osaka to go to this one restaurant, which pulls people in because the quality is absolutely top. Everything here they've grown themselves, the mushrooms, they make the tofu, it's all homegrown, and they're using very, very sophisticated cooking techniques. And so they're basically doing what has already been done in Europe, but is just starting in Japan now. And I think could easily be done in Thailand for those who want to do it. Because if you did have a top restaurant like this in some faraway part of Thailand, I promise you people would come. And the other thing, of course, is food events. And this has happened in Thailand, where you get the famous chef to come to the countryside and they use local ingredients. In Japan, there's a project called Dining Out, and they've done it in many places now, and they really carry it pretty far. So it's about presentation. It's not only the food, it's about location, choosing this incredible location, designing the view. When we started on this project, there were a bunch of trees here. Nobody even knew that view was there. We landscaped it to create that view. Lighting, incredible lighting of the gardens, of the restaurants. Or we did one project in the rice paddies, and the whole area of the rice paddies is lit up. Here you can see what it's like at night, and the diners are here, and out in front of them we've lit up the rice paddies. So it becomes not only food, it's a full experience, right? Dining in the town, where we take over the whole town, which involves getting the local police, everybody to say okay. Bringing in local arts. Of course, then the key thing is the food, which has to be with local ingredients. Here we're cooking. And another important item is the locals are involved. So it's not only the famous chef, you also have the locals coming in and working with him. And finally, one quick thing I wanted to run by, which is something else that's happened in Japan, which is unexpected. So far I've talked about very haiso kind of food, but there's also very normal kind of food like ramen, right? And certain towns and villages have captured that brand. So for example, and it becomes their identity. And for example, in Thailand, people think if they go to Isan, they should have somtam. But that's just Isan. They haven't got one town in mind. But for example, Kitakata, which is in northern Japan, now it's a brand, Kitakata Ramen. People go to Kitakata for the ramen and they line up for it. Or Kagawa Prefecture, which is in Shikoku, the young, good-looking mayor, governor, declared the province to be udon province, and so now people come to Kagawa for the udon. It's part of who they are. And the other one, Kinosaki, which is an onsen, and they grabbed crab. So they are the town of crab. And when you get there, there's crab everywhere, and even at the railway station. So people go to Kinosaki for crab. So these are the different ways that it can be done through houses, through art, and through food. Thank you very much.
ขอบคุณค่ะ Thank you very much ค่ะคุณ Alex